Sounds like a rock song.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming for tonight's session. We're here tonight to discuss potential processes or thoughts on the budget preparation for 2026. I know some committee members have some thoughts and ideas that we can discuss as a committee and take into consideration. First, why don't we start with a Selectmen's update?
Thank you, Chris. As you can tell, I am not BB. BB is on her way back from a work stint in Orlando, Florida. Feel very badly for her, but she had to do it. So, at our last meeting, we approved a police grant for mobile data terminals, so about $29,000. And if you come back tomorrow night, you'll learn of another fantastic grant that the police chief has gotten, and I think she told us at our last meeting that she's gotten over $500,000 of grants this year.
Wow.
So, we also approved an application for Twin Pines, of our grant related to Twin Pines development. We finalized the warrant, and we discussed the school funding situation, which again we'll be talking about tomorrow night. If you've seen the press today, the judge did not reconsider his rulings, and it's being kicked to the legislature to take care of it, so that should make for interesting spring and summer of activity. Otherwise, I'm delighted to be here and to listen tonight.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for Bill?
Can we clarify exactly where that is right now, what the judge did or didn't do, and where it leaves us?
Well, you know what? I'm just going to ask him to tell you that, answer that.
Since the judge has denied the reconsideration, the likely next step will be to file an appeal in Supreme Court.
Okay.
And if pending
What didn't he reconsider?
his decision to require the adequacy of education go from about 4,000 a student up to 7,000, ordering the state to use 7,000, and which would require the excess SWEP funds that New London collects would then go to the state.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Bill? Okay. We can move on to the approval of the February 7th meeting minutes. Anyone have any comments or editorial changes?
If I may, just a question.
Sure.
Regarding the petition warrant for $900,000, Kim, if that is tabled or not voted for, does the budget does the P&I get adjusted as well, the principal interest in the
There
budget?
will have to be a motion at town meeting to reduce those amounts.
So you have to motion both the $900,000 and the P&I?
No, so if the 900,000, if that warrant article doesn't pass,
Yep.
then that's done with that.
Okay,
But we have included the principal payment and interest for the 900,000. So
Right.
the selectmen will have the amounts of money and will likely offer an amendment to reduce them
okay.
if it fails.
Okay, so that's procedural, that would just happen? Okay. That's all.
Oh, great. Good question. John, any meeting minutes, editorials? Okay, that's first. Anyone else? Any motions to
I move
approve?
that we approve the February 7th minutes as stated.
Any second? All those in favor? Aye, all right. We'll move on to discussion of processes, potential processes or new changes or thoughts on what people may want to do as Budget Committee moves forward into 2026 budgeting. So I'll open the floor for, Kim, do you want to go through these, like to start, or how do we?
First, can I just mention that one of your invited guests, Karen Epstein, was not able to attend this evening, and she wanted me to express her appreciation for the invitation and regret that she couldn't attend. And Hannah was not able to be here as well. She had some other things, so just want to note their absences. So I will say that with the agenda, Budget Committee members had the opportunity to email the chair and myself about items that they wanted on the agenda. So what I have prepared here, I collected all of those comments, and that's what we have here in kind of my own order. You can feel free to change them, pass over things, talk about them, whatever.
Okay. So why don't we start with A, consideration of returning town meeting to May. So I'd ask whoever suggested that to discuss their thoughts and the reasons.
Chris, can I say something first?
Yeah.
Just contextually. So, and if Peter Bianchi listens to the video, I want to apologize to him. I think I oversimplified his comment on the budget last 2 weeks ago, and I went back and looked at the data, and I think it's good contextual data for this conversation, that we should all appreciate what this data says, so that should the taxpayers question us, we have answers for it. Peter talked about a 13% increase. If you actually look at 24 over 23, the amount to be raised by taxes is going up 17%, and the proposed tax rate, already assuming that the fund balance is used at $450,000, is going up 19.7%. So those two data points, I think, are important and a good reason for this conversation.
Okay.
You call, John.
So, Chris, I'm the one that put in A. This is a matter for discussion, but originally, when we went to the fiscal year, it allowed us to move, or a choice of either March or May annual or town meetings. And initially, we went with the May town meeting, and there was, with the idea that the snowbirds, the people who are down south would be here by May and would add to the number. In reality, that didn't seem to happen significantly. So I think it was Joe Cardillo, talking with the school board, said, well, you know, by doing the May thing, not enough people are showing up to vote for the school budget and so forth in March. And so we went back to March. And except for last year where there was a major item to be talked about, the numbers I don't think improve much by going back to March. So the point of going back to May is to try and get more of the snowbirds to get involved, but also to get the budget process further along in the fiscal year so that we have more experiential data of how the year is going. Right now, we essentially end all this in February, and we don't, and our fiscal year doesn't start until July. So the other thing is it would take the discussion of the budget and a lot of the work of the budget out of the holiday season and put it, as I said, more contiguously to the beginning of the fiscal year and to the town meeting. So this is a matter for discussion. I think there are pros and cons either way. I happen to like the sound of the May one, so.
Thank you, John. Any thoughts or discussion from other committee members? Or selectmen, for that matter?
So procedurally, what has to happen for that to happen?
Well, I think the selectmen could change it to May if they wanted to. Town meeting voted to go back. They have expressed desire to stay in March town meeting. I don't know.
Does the town have to vote on it, or can the
I
select board
don't
just make
think
it?
so. Do they? Do they have to?
We voted last
Yeah.
time.
I know they did vote to go back. Generally, the selectmen set the date for the elections and town meeting. But yeah, I think they would have to vote again.
Is there any historical data on just attendance?
Well, my recollection was 2012 was the first year it happened. That was my first year here. There was an increase in attendance, and I want to say it was about under 100, but there was an increase, and then it tailed off as the years went on. I think that we could all agree that the attendance is in large part what's on the warrant. Although I will say, if there's a blizzard in March, attendance will go down probably no matter what. Our population is, such that they don't like to drive at night with storms. So May would alleviate that issue. There's not a lot of storms the second Tuesday in May. But I think that Will would speak to the issues of having to put on 2 elections, because we would still have to have the school election in March. All the other towns are on the calendar year, they're all on March town meetings, so we would have to do that. Just like when we had the June town meeting during the pandemic, we still had the March elections for the school. We had to, because all the other school the other towns wanted to. So it would be more work for the town. I can appreciate what John's saying as far as additional information. We'd have 2 more months of information. I think the fiscal year makes it tough on us anyway, because we're forecasting so far in advance. I'm not sure that another 2 months really helps that much. I think the weather would be better, but I think the hit to the schools would be problematic as far as there's less participation by voters if the only thing is schools. They do participate when it's local elections.
Which year was the COVID June meeting? Do you remember? Was it 21?
2021.
2021?
We met in June, and that was allowed by state law, and then we went back to March. So there were 4 years.
It was one of the least attended meetings.
It seemed like there were a lot under the tent. I don't know, everybody seemed
Well,
happy. I mean, it was like a party as far
And it
as I
really-
recall. People were asking where the bar was. It was like a wedding or something.
And to your point of it being driven by what's on the warrant, I think that was the year that the Stallman building was on the warrant, and it was taken off before the meeting got going, and a whole bunch of people got up and left.
Yeah.
So it just.
Yeah, I mean, I
evidence
think
that they're
word
there
got
for a
out that that was going to be taken off, so.
Yeah.
But, last year, there was a lot of people. I forget what the weather was. It was probably decent last year, right? But there was a lot of people.
So there's 2 reasons here, and I don't know that we can do anything other than talk about it, but the 2 things really is, do we afford ourselves more time for doing analysis for the budget and building a better budget? And the second reason is, what's the right time to get as many people as possible to the meeting? Right? Those are the 2 reasons. Beyond that, I don't know what you're going to talk about.
I mean, Lindsay, you have a comment?
No, I think those are all very valid points. It just, thanks to Kim's handy pie chart, thank you. Oh, sorry, Lynn. 45% of our property tax bill, and every dollar needs to be accounted for. I totally understand that. I just want to make sure that if that majority portion of somebody's property tax bill is represented, that we have the most voters there too. Equal arguments all the way around. It just, looking at the pie chart, 45% is a large portion of your bill. So it's a quandary for sure.
So if the Budget Committee wanted to recommend that to the Selectmen, they could go on the next year's warrant, and then the first time it could happen if it passed in 2025 would be 2026. And since it's not, you could take a poll vote at this coming town meeting. I know Joe did that once or twice to see if people want it.
Okay. Lou, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I see both sides. I do view a lot of it from the standpoint that democracy works best when the most amount of people are allowed to voice their opinions. So on that and that alone, I would say, let's do it when we can get the most people in a town meeting. So that's just me.
I think to Colin's point before, I mean, while there may be historical data, there is no evidence to show one way or the other that there's more attendance in May or March. It usually is driven by what's on the warrant articles. So I get that there might be a little bit more data. I'm not sure, Kim, to your point, it's really going to make that much of a difference. Again, this is my own opinion. I haven't seen it broken right now. So, I mean, my own opinion is to keep it the way it is, but again, that's my own opinion. If other members want to voice their opinion or don't have an opinion, Melissa?
Well, we know that manpower is thin, and I wondered if Will might give his opinion on what it would be like to put on 2 meetings,
2 elections.
2 elections.
Obviously, manpower is, you're asking people to do more, so we generally have pretty good attendance attendance there and that sort of stuff, so I don't think that's the problem. I think the real problem would be nobody being here to vote for the school. I think that would be a huge problem in the school's board's mind, at least. And it would cost more money, obviously, to do 2 separate elections, because we got to program all the machines again and all that sort of stuff. So I guess, in my mind, I struggle to see what difference the 2 events would make versus the other stuff. So I guess I would be in the March camp, but I don't feel super strongly either way, obviously, and if people wanted to do it in May. And I guess the other thing I would say too is, at least from my perspective, I don't think snowbirds are as much of a thing as they used to be. People certainly leave for a time, but they don't do it for a whole chunk of time as much as they used to, and they'll kind of come in and out and that sort of stuff. And I think the bigger problem is making this important to people. That's the real struggle. And, I think we could do better marketing, we could do more stuff that way to get more people engaged. At some point, the town is gonna have to dive into social media to get people that are below my age, and we haven't done that yet. So, I don't know, I guess in my mind, I kick it around and come to March, but that's my opinion.
Okay. Thanks, Will. All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Move on to the next item, Budget Committee meetings. So, again, not sure who proposed these, but certainly. I don't know, John. I mean, it doesn't have your signature on it. Do you want to walk through the thoughts on those?
Well, I think this is going to be moot if we don't change to May, so.
Okay.
Although Valentine's Day could become sacrosanct, I think. But other than that, if we're going to stay with March, then we're going to have to struggle through the holidays together. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to discussions around, we usually start after the Selectmen, after the budget's submitted, and then have those discussions. I know there's always been a back and forth on, this year we went with a one-day meeting where all the department heads presented their budgets to the Selectmen. I wasn't able to attend that meeting, unfortunately, but I don't know if the attendance, in the past, before this year, we had done joint Selectmen Budget Committee meetings with the department heads to make it more efficient. I don't recall, I have to go back to agendas if that allowed us more discussion, less discussion time. I feel like at least for the last few years, the Budget Committee meetings, we have had about the same number of meetings. This year was a different, so I'd be curious to get different committee members' thoughts around the process of having the department heads present at one time, and even Bill, your opinion on how that went this year versus years prior around that process. Any committee members' thoughts on that? To John's point, I mean, it's not if we're not moving the town meeting to May, then I guess some of the items on here aren't relevant, but I guess, are we open to changing meeting times? So go ahead, Charlie.
I was waiting for Melissa, but
And I got shy.
she got shy. Okay, I'm not shy. My sense is whatever adjustment might be made is if the discussion and questions that are given to and had with department heads can be less budget committee asking for justification and more about what's the basis for the budget item or budget as a whole that's being requested. The dialogue would change. I didn't particularly, having been now a new first-year member, I would have approached it differently, knowing the process, and would have been more engaged in discussion and give and take with department heads about their particular budget as a result. So I'm more inclined about thinking about that, then
So is it the way the department heads have presented their budgets, or is it in the,
a little bit of both. I think it's how much I get prepared to be able to be informed versus just a questioner, which I tried to do. And secondly, how they think about presenting the budget versus I got a budget line item and it's going to increase, it's going to increase by X, or I'm holding it even. There's not a lot of discussion about the basis or the assumptions supporting a particular item, or, it's historically, it was X and now it's Y. So I'm thinking about both.
sorry, I'm trying to, because I know that, again, when the department heads present their budgets for the first time, they walk through just about all their items, and I feel like they give that context. But again, I wasn't there for this meeting. I don't know if you were there for the department head presentation to the selectmen.
I was not at that
Okay.
particular meeting, so I didn't have the appreciation
Yeah.
for that. I guess maybe that speaks more
No,
to
no, no,
how I may
no, no,
engage
no.
differently to be a better contributor
Yeah.
versus questioner.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think to your point, as I recall my first year, that was a similar feeling of just trying to get comfortable and what questions should I ask.
Yeah.
I go back to, I enjoyed the joint meetings because, one, it created efficiency for the department heads, that they didn't have to present multiple times. Two, then there was some mutual discussion with the selectmen around some questions that the selectmen had and budget committee members had. But you can,
I totally agree with that. I found the select board did their review and they came up with their recommendation in support of a particular budget, now it comes to us, and then we do our thing, and and we end up in the same place. I mean, why not be more efficient? And if it required a little bit more time, because we were doing it together, I'd be very much in favor of doing that.
any other thoughts or just, yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
I second what Charles says, and it is hard stepping in. I completely agree. And we went through this dialogue the first time too, and you also have concern, or I have concern over, how much time is spent in meetings rather than time doing their actually intended purpose. I'm not speaking for you, but it's a lot. And then after you have a couple of members that have been on the boards for a couple of years, you get a little bit blasé, and I really appreciate all your efforts and all your questions that you asked. I mean, I thought they were very relevant and really valid, and it's what you should ask. I'm just giving feedback here. Like I said, I thought it was much more efficient when we did it jointly, too, because then I could also piggyback off our Board of Selectmen, who also attend even more meetings than we do, and as many meetings as the department heads. So they have a wealth of knowledge or background where we can all collectively share rather than just trying to catch up and get ourselves up to speed singularly. So, totally agree.
Bill, I may ask either again, I don't recall the rationale for this year having the one-day discussion, and any department head should be willing to give their thoughts on their experience and maybe what's been the most valuable for you as a department head in presenting. I'd love to hear both sides.
So I'm sorry that Bibi isn't here because she might have a different perspective on this, but I think that, first of all, we spend all year round working with the department heads in different ways. You see some of it, but a lot of it takes place offline, if you will, one way or another. And so therefore, by the time we come to the budget, there's not a lot of new information for us. We know most of what's there, and for those of us that have been on the board for a while, we also know mostly why the numbers are what they are. And so taking that into consideration, at least Janet and I felt that it would be useful to try a much more efficient way of doing things, which was to have the one-day meeting on that Friday when we went for 5 or 6 hours and accomplished, I think, probably 90% of what we needed to do. And I think the feedback that I've had from the department heads was that was really appreciated because it showed understanding of their time. Now, you weren't there and Charlie wasn't there, and I don't know who else wasn't there that day. So It's hard to know
Sure.
whether the Budget Committee got benefit from that or not, but I think we felt, and I think BB did too, that, we learned a lot and we got a lot done, and the few things that were left over, we got done in due course, but we have a lot of experience going into it, I think, is the
Yep.
real issue. And
Agreed.
it's not just, okay, it's time to talk about how the departments function. And I at least have a tremendous amount of respect for all of our department heads now who've been in their jobs for a while. And so I understand when they say that this is something that they believe is appropriate, it's there. And I guess my last thing to say is, irrespective of spending limits and so on, maybe the thing that needs more time be spent on is service levels, because we are a people-dominated organization, and the money that we're spending is being spent at the amounts it's being spent because we need the people to provide the services, and we see that in a variety of places, whether it's closing the town clerk's office for an hour in the morning or closing the transfer station on Sunday or so on. The feedback the selectmen get is, why'd you do that? So, so for the services that I think we're hearing people want in town, it takes people to do that. It takes people to manage the dispatch center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It takes people to have a patrol car on the road 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, et cetera, et cetera. It takes people, as Jay will tell you, to take care of all the fire prevention things that are becoming increasingly important, and so on and so forth. So, across all the departments, it seems to me we are dealing with people issues, and I think my observation is we're pretty lean. We don't hire very deep, and when we have a problem like somebody leaving the administrative assistant's job in the town offices, suddenly Kim has to be making copies and answering telephones and so on. So we don't have any backup
Yep.
there. I think I'm fair to say that we're about to have backup now again.
Very close.
Very close. So service level maybe is becoming an increasingly important topic, because if we're going to provide the services that we offer, then we're going to have to staff them.
Yep.
Comment on that.
Yeah.
Bill, thank you for that. I also come from a perspective of service creep. So what I would really appreciate is learning before we get into a budget discussion about considerations for increases in services before the increase is presented as a budget line item. Because you get flat-footed with, oh, now we need X more for this particular service, and we sit as a group to say, oh, okay, well, we're not in a good position to have a discussion about it that allows for the balance of opinion and perspective and merit. And I hate to call it out, but I just to anecdotally use an example. There was a comment in a budget meeting 2 budget meetings ago when we were talking about the recreation budget. Putnam, no deference to you particularly, and it was, Putnam is considering increasing services to 7 days a week. And what went off in my head is, oh, really? And at what cost, and for what reason, and in the context of recreation, maybe it's a good thing. In the context of the budget as a whole, maybe it's God, that would be great to do, but maybe in the whole, it wouldn't be. And so if we had that kind of sort of knowledge, we could have constructive debate and discussion about it before it comes as a line item to say yay or nay.
So that's a great example, actually, Charlie, because there's a place where I'm thinking, working year-round with the department heads and so on. Somebody's gone to recreation meetings and so on, and there's been discussions with Putnam that haven't been formal presentations, in public meetings, but we know that, town people have been concerned that there aren't lifeguards on duty on, the 7th day of the week. And
Exactly.
so on. So by the time he makes that proposal to us, we're not being blindsided, but perhaps you are because you don't have the benefit of the same thing.
Right.
Back to the service level again, I was interested at our last meeting that one of the big budget hawks in town actually stood up and congratulated Bob Harrington on doing a better job of cleaning the sidewalks off. Well, that costs money. In fact, it cost a piece of capital equipment we had to buy. But again, we had become increasingly aware that people were concerned when they couldn't walk down Main Street because it hadn't been cleared in a timely fashion or it was cleared too narrowly.
Yeah.
Now, was that a service increase that perhaps we should have talked about more, that maybe that was too much of a hit, but there we had somebody who's usually a critic of our spending stand up and congratulate us on that particular move. So you really can't win, but I think you're right. We have the tremendous advantage of working with these department heads and Kim year-round, and so we don't get hit with very many surprises by the time it comes to the budget, and you know, they've all been around the horn a few times, and I think this is going to be important, Chris, with at least 3 new budget committee members coming on board, that you all wanted to talk more about how you educate them while not boring the hell out of John Wilson.
Go ahead, Colin.
Because John's seen this many times.
So I think that my comments and all the above are, if the select board is very comfortable with what's going on because of the number of meetings they go to, the budget committee, whose responsibility is to present the budget to the town, doesn't have that familiarity after 7 meetings.
Yep.
So I think the question is, how does the budget committee play a more formative role in presenting the budget to the town in an informed way? And perhaps if the select board has a good appreciation of the service levels, maybe the budget committee, and we can get into some of the thoughts I had later on in the agenda, can begin to explore, not across the entire budget, but over a period of years, different parts of the budget, how can we measure or deliver that service at a less expensive cost? Are there cost choices we could be making at the department head level that would not impact service, but can be done in a more efficient way? And I look at it either vertically, organizationally, or horizontally at a functional level. And if you look at the budget in those different ways, you might find opportunities to do things more effectively that can reduce the cost without impacting service. Or you might impact service, but you won't be able to measure what it is. So I think that the independence of the budget committee should be maintained, and we should be figuring out a way where we can add value to the budget's creation by being more informed about it. And one of the areas that we talked about before is a strategic view of it. So.
Yep.
And I think one of the interesting things is the fact that we do have a master plan, but it is primarily conceptual in nature. And every year we go and we basically try to decipher what's the department heads wish to have as their priorities, which I consider to be valid. But I think perhaps if there was in addition to the master plan, or as an addendum to the concept plan that is indeed a master plan, to have a 5-year plan, something that we can go on with metrics and that can actually be measured. Yes, there's going to be changes, but the fact of the matter is, so that we go on reinventing the wheel every year, we end up kicking ball down the road, perhaps sometimes for lack of information, perhaps sometimes because the people do not desire to do so. But a master plan would an addendum to the master plan that would present a vision of what's going to happen in the next year or in the next 3 years would probably go a long way to making sure that we can actually craft a cohesive and well understood budget, considering whether services need to be increased or decreased, or whether the budget is sufficient to meet the demands of the town or the people whom, we basically we basically provide services for.
Any other? Go ahead, John.
The first thing I might point out, in the last 2 years' budgets, if the Budget Committee hadn't existed, the budget would have been essentially the same, that the Selectmen's budget was what was put forth.
Can I ask, is that a bad thing?
I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying that's the way it has been.
Yeah, and I think the budget has been the same for more than 2 years, has
Yeah,
been
I-
reconciled to be the same.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, is that for you, it sounds like it's not necessarily a positive, that it's the same budget.
I think you're reading into the roll of my eyes or something here, but no, I'm just saying that that's the way it is. The question, of course, comes up in this day and age, do you need a budget committee? The second thing is the purpose of the budget committee is to be a mediator between the taxpayer and the select board and the budget that they present. And so I think we're at a point where we got to start choosing. If every year we're just agreeing with the select board, what is our reason to be? On the other hand, if we do things like Colin's talking about and what Lou is talking about, and doing a lot more future predicting and planning, then I think the Budget Committee still has a place here. We do, my suggestion, and I'm sort of rambling, sort of ADHD, I guess, I'm sorry, but my suggestion is that we make a real effort to coming to that one-day meeting with the Selectmen, and then we, as a Budget Committee, continue on, and we're going to be a reactive element that's going to look at what they present on that one day and decide what things we want to deal with. I think along with what Lou is talking about, if we're going to use the master plan has got to be something more than it is right now. I don't know how you put a number on a form-based architecture or things like that. I think you need to, we need to probably work more with a CIP than we do the master plan to actually get a financial plan for the future. So anyway, those are all my thoughts. I'm not pushing one way or the other, but there you are.
Yeah, I think I'd look at that, my own opinion is a little bit differently, that we've been able to present similar budgets, because I think in years past, and including this year, the budget has changed from the start of the process to the end of the process, right? We actually added more money this year to the budget and voted to add more money to the budget, right, overall than what was initially presented. So those reconciliation discussions, the Selectmen have sometimes changed their minds on their budgets from what was initially proposed based on feedback and voting from the Budget Committee and vice versa that's happened. So I'd look at that as we've had our own discussions, and where we as a Budget Committee feel like the budget should be as a group of 9, right, and voted on that, and then the Selectmen have taken that into consideration, and they've sometimes changed their budget during their meetings, or vice versa. So again, we can add more meetings, and we can talk about future planning and the process of what that could look like. I don't know how difficult it would be for Chief to look out 5 years from now on what costs may be for fuel or for things like that. I think that's a discussion that the Selectmen and the the department heads need to have. I guess my own opinion is that I'm happy to have more meetings for discussion, but I really don't see a huge problem with what's happening now, because the budgets have been presented in a similar fashion because there's been good debate between the Budget Committee and the Selectmen and the department heads.
Well, I would say your comments are duly noted.
I think that perhaps a value add here that the Budget Committee might be able to offer is budget analytics. I know people like to say that the government is different than for-profit or not-for-profit, but I think at the end of the day, as the budget grows, I, for one, as a taxpayer, although I'm not going to be at this table, I'll be out there, is going to be looking for analytics that support budget increases. And I think that the Budget Committee, picking some of those items that we can talk about later on in the meeting, again, it doesn't have to be every line item, can begin to demonstrate some value to the taxpayer that says, and I'll pick a couple of ideas, all right? So the Chief, Cobb and I had a conversation about police cars. And benchmarks say that there are less expensive police cars. Would service be degraded with spending less money on a police car? I would argue not, but that's a discussion we could have with the police chief. The fire chief talked about setting the schedule for equipment replacements back in 1987. I would suggest since 1987 that we've had some very significant improvements in technology and manufacturing processes and manufacturing products that we could probably relook at that schedule. And that could potentially add value to how we would set asset levels and how we would spend our reserve funds. So I think there is a number of areas that Budget Committee members could get into that could add value in that area.
Hey, Adam, go ahead.
I just want to say I completely agree with John on the comments of the master plan and CIP relationship that, the master plan is a much more visionary land use based document. We as the town of New London certainly include some other things that the state doesn't require us to include. But I think it is a much higher level document than the projects that you folks would be working into potential budgets at some point. And the next step from that would typically be the CIP or a department budget. And so I think, the term master plan, I think sometimes gets used in a larger sense than our actual adopted master plan. But I just think that I completely agree with John that that's important to remember that, master plans are done once in a decade. And in that 10 years, priorities can shift and those should be reflected annually in the CIP. Hopefully this year, the CIP is going to look a little bit different just to keep you all remind you of that. Lynn and I were talking this morning. She had her meeting with the new software company, so I think the CIP may be more useful now that we will have the new budgeting software, so that may also help. And I guess real quick while I'm up here, I'll offer my comments on the day-long budget session. I think from my perspective, and I think I can speak for the other department heads, we found it really helpful. It was nice to be able to deal with one budget or one day, all of the budgets. You sort of got a more uniform conversation that wasn't, one budget's discussed and certain questions are asked, and then 2 weeks later you forget the vein of conversation that you were in, and maybe you should have asked Public Works a question that was similar to, the fire department that was a thought-provoking question. Having them all back-to-back in a day, a lot of those themes sort of emerged throughout the day, and it seemed very useful. I also think that there's, a benefit in sort of a holistic view of things, that it's not sort of this, little one meeting, one budget, we sort of move on and we forget, and then, 8 weeks later, we're back here to look at the whole budget together, but we've sort of, it's been, 2 months since you talked to me about my budget, and so I did see value from, sitting down, hashing it out. It was a long day, and I understand Friday is tough, people work, that can be, but it did seem valuable from our perspective.
Okay. Go ahead.
Adam, can you stay right on the master plan? So that spreadsheet that you guys filled out several weeks ago. To your point, I know the master plan is sort of a high-level thing, right? And then you have a bunch of activities that were on the implementation table, and they have in their status of ongoing. Is there any thoughts about whether or not that ongoing can be, where appropriate, where applicable, translated into what action needs to be accomplished, and does that action require funding by some date so that that can feed into the CIP? Because I don't see a linkage between these things that require funding, and perhaps a CIP and/or an operating expense.
So I think it would be committee-specific, because obviously within one implementation plan, there's a vast array of different committees that are responsible for each of them. So, I don't work with the Waste Reduction Committee on a regular basis, for example, so I don't know exactly how they would see that go. I think, the planning board always has the hope that they would, meet annually with each one of the committees and they would get updates. But the reality is the planning board meets like 28 times a year as it is, and they're a pretty busy group. And their meetings typically run, 2 hours, sometimes 3.5. And so I think that they wish that they had the opportunity to do those sorts of things, Colin, but I'm not sure that it would.
No, so that's a fair point. So I think, Bill, perhaps one of the things the select board can consider is taking a look at how do you call out, what's the way to look at the translation of the master plan implementation table if the planning board, and I don't mean to speak for the planning board, and I don't mean to take work away from them, but if they don't have the time, rightfully so, to go into the detail that can translate action to cost by certain timeframes, then the master plan will have no impact on the town. So maybe there's another way of managing it?
So Colin, I think you and I have chatted about this before, and 3 years ago, a group of former selectmen proposed that the CIP process be a different committee be formed as the statute allows because of the planning board's time commitments, and both the planning board and the selectmen decided that wasn't a good idea. So that's been there. It can be revisited, I suspect, but that was a solution that 4 former selectmen all thought might help the process you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's more, and I do recall that conversation, and I think it's more than the CIP, because some of these things might be operating budget stuff, right?
Sure.
Right, so.
I would just say, though, that, just because they don't have time to meet with each individual committee doesn't mean that there's not an impact on the town. I mean, I think if you look at the housing section specifically from the master plan implementation, the planning board has done a considerable, and the housing commission, a considerable amount of work, and there's at least 8 or 9 items that are accomplished at this point. We're 2 years into a 10-year plan. And I think the waste reduction committee probably gets the gold star for the number of things that they have accomplished from that table. So I think good work is happening, and it is meaningful to the town. It just may not be that all of the different groups come together on an annual basis.
Well, you raise an interesting issue, because you're citing committees that have been very productive, and it wasn't until recently where we said maybe we need a mobility committee, right? So 4 or 5 years into the master plan, now we have a mobility committee. Maybe they will be equally productive once they get started. So maybe the real question is, are the committee assignments appropriate? Maybe we can redefine the committee assignments. Right?
And I think that's a good point, Colin, too, that those are the things that when you're looking at a 10-year master plan, you have no idea that we're 2.5 years, 3 years in now. At this point, we wouldn't have necessarily seen that coming. So I do think that is a downside of 10-year plans. Things change quickly.
You have a very lucid point, and again, tagging along with what John and Colin are saying, we have a master plan. Yes, we understand it is more of a conceptual nature. This is what we want to have, a beautiful town with rural and, character and everything like that. We do have a CIP that is more of a planning, tool. It perhaps needs to be a bit expanded. We can't forecast. I've been in government service, either full-time or volunteer, for 47 years. There is a way you can forecast. We know that in 10 years, the population of New London may be up to 8,000 or 6,000 or 7,000. We can, for example, our police chief can actually, say, with a town of 7,000 people, I'm going to need X officers, I'm going to need X vehicles, I'm going to need, X resources, and then put that in a way that we can act on it, saying, okay, in 5 years, we're the lifespan, normal life, elected lifespan of a member is 3 years. There should be some progress in that towards reaching that goal. And the same thing with recreation. We are going to have 8,000 people, so therefore we probably will need another children's park and perhaps a dog park. And that basically causes the budget to reflect it, and then you can have a metrics that say, the appropriate metrics that say, okay, these are the goals, and this is what we should have. And part of I'm not feeling uncomfortable, but I certainly feel that we're somewhat improvising as we do that. This is the second year that I'm in the budget committee, and it seems that, we basically, for the last 2 years, we've been doing the same thing, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, let's, we have the house on fire. It doesn't have to be that way, and I think things are well, but they could be better. That's all I'm saying.
And, there are population projections in the master plan, and hopefully, I think all of the department heads use the demographics chapter as a tool when they're planning. I can assure you that it's nothing close to 8,000 people in the outset of population projections that we've had. And the state provides that data through statisticians to us, so that is all in there. So hopefully it is being used as a tool, just a matter of, there are a lot of things that get put in master plans that never grow legs. And so I think that's something to remember too, that from a budgeting standpoint, there could be things in there like, a rec center, for example, that was a hot topic in 2018 when we were in the planning stage. It has not been on the table in the last couple of years. So, it's just important to keep those things in mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Bill, I think back in the old days, our CIP committee used to be made up of a combination of budget committee people and planning board people, and I thought it worked quite efficiently then. That we had a combination of thought and finances brought together, future and finances and so forth. And then, as I recall, we got a little turf war, and the planning board, and they correctly so by the RSA, took over the whole event. I still think, the way we're talking now and what Colin's saying and so forth, that there's a lot of room for the budget committee to be more involved in the CIP, along with the planning board or representatives from the planning board. I think it would work out very nicely that way. So
I think you're right. Charlie was from the budget committee on the CIP this year. He might want to comment on that. It was probably not fair to Charlie in the process, however, that he hadn't been through a budget cycle, and yet he had to try to view this from a budget committee point of view. But I agree with your history lesson.
Agree 100%. Sending the new guy into the CIP to provide some kind of value other than new and ask stupid questions or new questions or the same questions. I left that experience feeling it was, I want to say it was a good experience, and a good process, but I think where we could be better is that we are in maybe it's more people involved, but the discussion about what's in the CIP, what's the priority of a singular item in the context of multiple items, and if you add them all up, we've all seen the numbers, it's extensive. And there's not a prioritization to those expenditures in any way that's provided in the process, at least as I experienced it at the CIP meetings. And I feel strongly that there's some value to be able to say, we have a capital improvement plan that looks over 10 years, and there are X number of items, and they carry certain financial value and investment, and that there's the old, we really need to do it, we want to do it, we'd like to do it. And if there was some categorization or prioritization to it, it would be informative to the budget process, not just in the particular year, but in thinking about this year in relationship to subsequent years.
I think you're right, Charlie. Of course, a large part of the numbers there relate to big vehicles like fire vehicles and highway vehicles and so on. And I think both Bob Harrington and Chief Lyon work hard on trying to figure out when they're going to need the next dump truck with plow and when they're going to need the next tanker with water in it and so on. But I also think that Colin made a reasonable point that, it's probably time to review the technology content of those things. But certainly Bob, in the years that I've worked with him, has, because again, this is the year-round thing, he's moving things around. And so something you may say, well, goodness, you had that truck here last year, this time now it's over here. Well, that's because he's thought about what his needs are and what the technology is, and more recently for both, for all vehicles that we've been ordering, the lead times are such that I think that all of the department heads that are ordering vehicles are a little squeamish right now about how long it's going to take something once they put an order in. They can't put an order in till there's been an appropriation, so it's a little sticky.
Admitted.
But you're right about what could happen.
And I also hear that now that you have a year under your belt, next year you're volunteering.
I'll be better next year, don't worry.
Yeah, Lindsay, go ahead.
To that point, and kind of echoing, I think by prioritization, things get moved around on the timeline. It's not linear. It's like, okay, we're gonna, and that's, I think Adam could probably speak more to it, but I think that is it's a projection committee, so they're just kind of trying, and I completely understand where you're coming from too, because I was like, well, what's more important? Is this truck gonna, rust out in the bottom and we're gonna need to replace it? And it's like, I don't know, but we're gonna move it to next year. Right? So I completely understand. It's just something has to fit on the grid somewhere, I think, and that's from my understanding, that's kind of how it's been going. I mean, it's not perfect. And some of these things we could probably utilize other resources, but it's just moving, it's like a Tetris block kind of a little bit.
And, I mentioned vehicles, but also, maintaining town buildings, that's not part of the CIP process, but certainly Jay the fire chief has been explicit for some period of time now about the probable need to expand the fire station to accommodate a larger vehicle. So maybe here's a vehicle and facility issue going hand in hand. I would be remiss if I didn't say that a new police station has been on that list for as many years as I've been around.
Has?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? and I feel quite comfortable or confident that before long we're going to see the library adding a facility issue onto that list also. So, we've got a bunch of older buildings that we've got to worry about maintaining, which is a big operating issue going forward. But we also got to begin to think about in 2030, maybe we're going to have some new facilities in this town that don't exist today. And some of them might also be related to recreation once Putnam gets ready to come back to some facilities issues too. So
yeah, I agree. I think I was leaning to John's comment primarily in that not knowing the history, it sounded as though there may have been more engagement with budget committee members as opposed to a sole member, new guy, into the CIP that would add some value to the deliberations and discussions. That's really where I was coming from, and my experience was what I was reflecting just from the perspective of pretty hefty projections on capital requirements, and that I just thought of it as one member simply from the standpoint of where do they lie regarding prioritization as well as capacity for funding.
So I would urge the Budget Committee later in the summer, early fall, when they're getting organized, when you're getting organized for this next cycle, to not invite any of the three new members of the Budget Committee to be on the CIP.
Well, we sent out an email for volunteers, and so, so speaking of being linear, I'm going to try and rile us back into the agenda, just because I know we've jumped around a little bit. So I feel like we've talked a little bit about some of these. We've talked about the relation between the Budget Committee and Master Plan. I'm curious on numbers, or letter C. And John, I don't know if this is you or Colin, around submissions by January 1st, along with the D, which is once they're submitted and approved by the Selectmen and Budget Committee, no changes are to be made. So maybe we can take both of those together.
Well, I'd like to address B3 first.
B3, okay.
I put that one in there, and I think that depending upon our conversation there, may or may not impact some of the ones below that. So one of the, I'll just read it out for the purpose of those who may not have it in front of them. This is to encourage both breadth and depth of Budget Committee involvement, so that there's a more informed approach to the budget rather than the 7 meetings that we've had over the last couple of years. I would suggest, as a potential schedule for discussion purposes, would be between March and July, the Budget Committee can work on items that they choose that would give them breadth and depth in certain budget items. And what it says above items, because the schedule was moved around, the above items really talk about the master plan issue. We've already talked about that. I referenced in the above items a little bit earlier horizontal and vertical analysis of the budget. So I think the Budget Committee can talk in March after the election on to what are the 4 or 5 categories that we could create committees around. We did last year on reserve budget, and that was, I think, pretty productive when we had the reserve budgets discussed about. So health insurance, fee schedules, contract renewals, insurance processes, cross-department synergies, pick 2 or 3 of them and do some deep dives, figure out how you can do some analytics and then modify the budget without sacrificing service levels. We already talked about the master plan. On July, I don't know, when do we get the actual year-end results? In July? August for 2024?
I have to have everything for the auditors mid-August. I mean, but that's just a rough year end. I mean, you can work off the MS 535 gets submitted to the DRA in September, and that's a fairly good tool to use for numbers.
So you have to wait till September for the real useful numbers for the previous year?
Yeah.
Because I think that the other thing that the Budget Committee can do is early on, rather than waiting until December, is looking at the year-end results. In fact, the RSAs encourage it. The RSAs actually encourage the Budget Committee with the words, shall meet periodically to review such statements. So you want to look at variance analysis. If we understood in August, September, October that we underran our budget by $2 million, that should raise some flags. It should help us have a conversation with the department heads as to why those underruns came, and it gives you plenty of time to react and have conversations about what to do with those underruns. And so I think that between March and July, picking a few items, between July and October, having conversations around the results of the previous year, and using that analysis to give guidance to the department heads as to what we would expect them to use for operating assumptions and building their budget. We expect you to do, I'll be extreme, don't come in at more than 2%. You like that? I like that. So, but I'm being extreme, but my point is that the Budget Committee can be in a position to offer the department heads guidance as to what they should be focusing on in their budget. So when we get that back, Our reviews are, did you fulfill the guidance, or if you didn't, why not? And that becomes a whole different conversation. And the conversation becomes in October to January, because you've got a deeper dive into understanding the budget and understanding the variances, where you can actually get more efficient with the budget. Or not. Maybe you decide you're not. But at this point, we don't have any of those conversations. We don't have any variance analysis. We don't have any conversations around opportunities for efficiencies. When they're raised, it's too late to handle it for the next year. So by accelerating that conversation, again, I'll go back to the police cruisers. If we had that conversation in August, then it has a different impact than if we have it in December, January. So those conversations should be had early on.
Yep, I would say for the police cruiser, budget wasn't submitted until August, so the opportunity to have that discussion didn't happen until the budget was submitted.
But Chris, I would argue that if you did an analysis on a deep dive, you would have done like I did. I would have benchmarked the other departments around the community, and in the development of the budget in July and August with the chief, we could have said, look for a less expensive vehicle. And the chief could have then done that analysis and come back with why it can't be done.
I
or
think
could be done.
I don't disagree in the thought process. I think you probably have more time than most people to deep dive on some of these analyses. And also directing department heads to, I know you used your extreme of 2%, but I'm also uncomfortable directing department heads on what their budgets should be, because they're the ones who are supposed to understand what the department is supposed to deliver from a service level and come back to us and the selectmen on what they think their budget should be.
Yeah, so
not us directing us, not us telling them what their budget should be.
And I might have used the wrong words, and I think there's a mental muscle here that's going to be developed, right? So at this point, it's a one-way flow, and the two-way conversation doesn't really happen. And some people take offense when there's direct questions. That's the only way, in my view, people who have responsibility for budgets can learn. And I think that when it comes down to working through that process, I agree. Every day is a Sunday. Right? I'm retired. So maybe to the extent that there are people on the committee where every day is a Sunday, they can choose to spend some time, if they have the skills, the inkling, and the time, to benefit the rest of the budget committee members by going into a deep dive. And that's what the choice could be. The budget committee can say, who has the time to take a look at the following 3 or 4 things, and create some subcommittees. And the rest of the budget committee would then benefit from that skill set and that time.
No, I don't disagree with that process at all. I think that's not unreasonable. Melissa?
Thank you. So when I read through this paper, I was very excited to see item 3, 1, 2, and 3. As a still feeling like a new member, I feel overwhelmed with the budget committee. Basically, we met 7 times, maybe a little bit more, and it just happens so fast, and you get handed something like this, and you're like, okay, what do I do with this? I thought that I was, financially savvy, but when it came to this paperwork, I had no clue what I was really doing, and I didn't have the time to learn it because I am a full-time and I don't have Sundays. So if we're going to be better and people like me are going to be a part of this budget committee, then it's got to be spaced out in increments in order for me to learn and realize what I don't know. And Colin has been just, and I haven't had any private conversations with Colin. I have just learned so much from him than any other process that I've been in for this budget committee. And I feel like I want to stay on the budget committee because of Colin. Like there's hey, I can see the light at the end of this tunnel, like I'm really going to learn something, like we're really going to be doing something, but I don't have every Sundays off. And I would be more inclined to stay on the budget committee if I saw it broken down something like this, little increments of time, and this is what we're doing, and this is, this is the next step. And when you grab your book, open up and look at those numbers, and you look at numbers 1 through 25, and I'm going to look at numbers 25 through 50, and you're going to focus on them. I didn't know what I was doing. I really don't know what I'm doing here. And I'd like to be a part of this.
Well, thank you for the kind words, but it's not just Sundays. Every day is a Sunday is what I meant. Every day.
So I don't have any.
No, I know that. I know. I think, though, that the software that Lynn is talking about, too, might help in this analysis, right? So I know it's going to take a while to get there, but being able to look across functions, and looking down at the organizations, candidly, it's just my opinion, I think every organization should have a complete reassessment every so many years by function. I'm going to use words that I know are terrible, and I really don't want people to take these to heart. I'm only using these words as a financial person. You can take a look at, is there a better way of doing function X? Should we do more part-timers versus permanent people, right? I mean, there are just all kinds of financial conversations that can, if we had the analysis done, could help the taxpayer understand and the department head understand how we meet those service levels. That's all I'm suggesting.
I've told Kim we should hire you as a consultant, so you can do those analysis,
Chris, can I just say?
or deep dives. Lindsay.
I'll be real quick. I apologize for stepping out. I had a kid trying to coordinate a ride for a kid back from hockey. It took a while. But also on that point, to piggyback off what Melissa said, I don't have Sundays or any other days, but I still want to be a part of this. And on that note, I do have a lot of faith and trust in our department heads, as well as the 147 committees that we have in this town to oversee and give judgment and opinion that we are doing things judiciously and economically and respectfully of the taxpayers, and it's not all on us. It is a shared experience as well as responsibility, and respectfully, I feel that, I have a full-time job. I actually have like 3. And that's not anybody's fault but my own and my own poor life choices. However, it doesn't mean I care any less for this town or want to be a part of the process. And so I just feel like at a certain point, how much longer can we ask more and more and more of our people here and not just respect the input that they're giving us?
And Chris, could I just speak to the issue of part-time, full-time? We have tried that. The Public Works Department did it, Selectmen's office, and the town clerk tax collector. So there was a time when we did try that, and all 3 positions were for a couple of years each, and it really didn't work for various reasons. So we're not opposed to trying new things. We have tried new things, and in particular that. And I would say today, I mean, that was a few years ago, but the employment outlook is even worse now. We're having trouble even finding full-time, never mind part-time. But again, my point is that we have tried it in at least 3 departments.
Okay, and listen, I use that as an example only, right? I mean, my point is that someone can do, it's been my experience, my life experience, that you can look at something 10 years ago and draw a conclusion. 10 years later, your conclusion could be different for lots of reasons. So because the town looked at something 10 years ago, doesn't mean it's the answer today.
Right. My point was only to illustrate that we have tried different things. It's not that department heads don't think outside the box and try different things.
I'm guessing that whatever it is that comes up, we've tried before, right? And all I'm saying is that,
Could be.
notwithstanding all the concerns that people are legitimate concerns that people are talking about, you don't make progress on a budget by just repeating things. You make progress in a budget by doing the analytics. That's all I'm suggesting.
Right. And my point is that we have tried in various things. I know Bob reworked his snowplow route. I mean, he realized savings in time doing that. So.
Public comment?
One thing I wanted to know, when would this vote be to move
That has to be a town meeting vote, as
So it
it's
would
been-
not happen this year?
Correct.
Okay. The second thing, when was the master plan established that we're all talking about right now?
The first one?
Where's Adam?
The current one.
Adam, when's the master plan established?
What's our current
When-
master plan date, Adam?
What's our date of our current master plan? And since '21, there have been a lot of changes in the world. Do we update that or get input on where we ought to go with where we're headed the next 5 or 10 years? I don't have an answer, I'm asking.
In 2030,
In 20?
31, it's a 10-year plan.
Right. My question is, with the changes that we've had with COVID and all, would it be wise to take a look at that again? Because there's a lot of changes that we've made here in New London, and there's changes that maybe the people want to make too. I mean, the residents, that we ought to take a look at and get a second opinion of where they want to go with this. Because it seems like with the changes that we've had with CIP, one of the comments that I made at a meeting a month ago, and I'm hoping the report will come out in 2 days, it was supposed to be ready the 23rd of February, was the assessments of the buildings and the long-term expenses that we may have, so that we can incorporate that in what Charlie was referring to as some of the long-term expenses we can expect in the next 4 or 5 years by an assessment of our assets, et cetera. And it seems to me that the role of the Budget Committee is to be the eyes and ears and the financial team questioning the best use of our tax dollars for the, and if this keeps going, you know, I heard numbers at 13%, 17, and 19.7. If you project that out for another 3 or 4 years, that's a big concern, I think, for many individual residents in the town, and so that's why I'm asking.
Sure. Just want to make sure for the recording that Cara gets it, but there are examples of communities updating a particular chapter on an individual basis. You know, I don't think the planning board has any plans for that at this point. You know, they're only a couple years into it, so I think it's still pretty fresh. Updating a master plan is a big endeavor. It's a pretty expensive endeavor. I think the last one cost $35,000, and it took us a lot longer because of COVID. We sort of stopped for a year in between, but the better part of 3 years. And so it's a long planning process. And so, you know, maybe they would shorten it a little bit, but I don't think we would jump into it anytime in the next, 24 to 60 months.
Okay, well, it's a suggestion that maybe we want to get some input from the residents, because things have changed, and they're going to change in the next 5 years with Twin Pines and Continuum coming into operation. Plus those percentages are, when you have those kind of percentages.
I just say on the percentages, that might be 1 year to 1 year, but that's not consistently
I understand.
year to year.
Right,
So
I understand that, but my
don't
point
wanna-
is the role, there's a discussion, do we really need a budget committee? And should we consolidate it? And I don't think that would be wise, because I think it's the residents that rely on each one of you. And Melissa, thank you for being very forthright and honest, because it is overwhelming for you, and it's maybe even more overwhelming for those of us that sit in the audience and don't have all the information that you have at hand. So I thank you for being honest and forthright. It gives me more confidence in you as a member and the other board members that take this very seriously. So my point is that I think we should look at something of the master plan and review it. It doesn't have to be a whole 30,000 survey. We've done enough surveys and need to take action on some of them. But back to my original point, when would the, I'll call it the maintenance assessment of the buildings and the shape they're in and what projected expenses we might anticipate, because this is our house, and we need to know what those are.
John, I think this
When
house is in really good shape. We've spent a lot of money on this house, so this is in good shape. The budget has funds in it to buy asset management software.
Right.
Hopefully, we get that sometime after July. Then there will be a time period when the surveys of the buildings have to be done, information put into the
Right.
software, and I think we'll be in a good place as far as keeping up our buildings, which hasn't been done in many years.
Right.
To the extent we should have been, which is why we had to spend so much
Yep.
money in this building. And I think the CIP is the place where those discussions will happen. CIP actually has money in it, as opposed to the master plan, which is kind of, as Adam discussed, a kind of high level. Those are the aspirations of the town. Let's keep it rural, those kinds of things. So it's the CIP that will have those issues of, okay, this is what we have for the buildings, these are the time periods for various upgrades. So I think we're in good shape, John. Those things are going to be happening.
And that'll happen when?
Hard to say, John. We're going to buy the software. If the budget goes through, we'll buy it. We can spend money in the budget after July 1st. So I believe that we've already looked at some software, so it won't be a long time to get it. How long it will take to get people up here to actually look at buildings.
Right.
Get all the information in. I have never done it, so I'm not sure, but it is a priority. So I think you should rest easy that we're well on our way.
I mean, will it be done in 2024, do you think? If you-
I can't guarantee anything, John. I think it's a priority, so they're going to work hard at it.
Okay.
John, I think my opinion would be, based on my understanding of the facilities work that needs to be done, late '25, early '26, so we have the data. It's going to take time to put it all in, yeah.
All right. So Colin, we talked about 3. We're done on that, okay. Anything else on submissions by January 1st?
That was a date I was working with, if we went to May.
Okay, so that's another.
I do think we need a cutoff date. And I think this year was an example of it, between what the library did and then the Conservation Commission and so forth. And I thought it was a lot of piling on late in the schedule, and I think we need to have some cutoff dates so that we can work. And you keep changing we're obviously working at a budget objective, and then once you zeroing in on that objective, and then if all of a sudden people pile in on top of that, then what you've done before is not still valid. And so I would just like to see us have a cutoff date. Certainly there's going to be times during the whole budget process when a building burns down or something, and we got to rethink things, but
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. Like, there are certain items, and maybe that's a discussion with the selectmen on some rules and processes around.
And very quickly, not to slow this thing down, but just to back up, I think the dynamic aspect of what we're trying to do with this committee planning could be in a combined CIP committee where they work together, both on the finances and on the needs of the town. This could be an ongoing thing during the year. I think that sort of makes the master plan not quite as important to update, but I'm done.
I think we've talked about the relationship between the committee and master plan. I know you made some comments around.
We're done with F.
We're done with F. Any other, I guess I'll look to other members. I don't want to continue to move ahead unless you have comments or questions. Okay.
F1 is just a conversation if you want to have it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So F1, which is on the second page, has to do with the unreserved fund balance. I know that Bill and I have had a number of conversations, both privately and in public, about this matter. I think the only thing I was suggesting that we have a conversation about here today would be, one of the sessions we would have between March and July would be an education, so that budget committee members could better understand the ebbs and flow of the unreserved fund balance, what it is, how it gets created, what it's used for, so we can appreciate maybe additional opportunities if they arise.
I think that you're absolutely right, Colin. That is, particularly with 3 new members and Charlie only been on a year, I think that's really necessary. Kim, does not the budget workshop that the state puts on also include something about this?
We have the budget workshops. We open up department head meetings to anyone on the budget committee to talk to department heads.
No, but I'm talking specifically about the topic that Colin's bringing up here about the unreserved fund budget. It's a very complicated subject.
My memory of the budget workshop is it mentions it. It doesn't give, it doesn't.
Hampshire Municipal.
I went to it, Bill, and Colin is correct. It was mentioned, but no depth.
So maybe the people who are knowledgeable about that at the Municipal Association could actually come, and we could have a work session here with them.
We'd probably be better off with our auditors. They're the ones that come up with the
The
amount.
auditors, whoever, but I think some professionals would help, and it's,
That'd be
you
awesome,
know,
actually.
Okay.
it's been useful talking with Colin about this over a period of time.
All right. Add that to the list. Anything on 2?
2 would be whatever meetings the Budget Committee decides they have in March to start the process that I suggested, since this is also off of my list. I think one of the first meetings you want to have is to prioritize other analysis, but that'll be for the new Budget Committee.
Continuation discussion around the end of meeting January 19th. So what was that?
That was, that's also on my list. That was the January 19th meeting. You had raised some issues around how the Budget Committee does work with town department heads.
Yeah, so
I asked that we just defer that conversation to a later date, and we never finished it.
yeah, I think, so my point on that was just around communication, so that everybody knew what was being asked of department heads, was just transparency. If we're going to, if committee members are going to email department heads asking for questions, that they would just copy in Kim and the other committee members. That was honestly it, just for transparency's sake. So everyone, that way, we're not asking Chief, 5 different people are asking 5 different questions. If someone has a question, feel free to ask the question, but just CC Kim and CC the other committee members.
And I agree with that. I think that's important. But you had made a couple other comments, and if you don't want to revisit them, that's fine. You had talked about the Budget Committee having some authority over what questions are asked of the department heads. And I went back to the RSAs, and in fact, the Budget Committee can, a department head should be responding to a Budget Committee inquiry, so, versus a person's inquiry. So I think that's...
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's a reasonable, when we have reasonable requests, and I think that's the discussion we can have as a Budget Committee on what that request is and when we expect the department head to have an answer to us. And I'd also look to Kim and the Selectmen as their leaders as to what else they have on their plate, to understand, you know, if we're going to ask Chief to do a deep analysis or a deep dive on something, what's a reasonable time frame for her to be able to do that? I don't know everything Chief has on her plate, so I'd go back to Kim and the Selectmen to say, what is a reasonable time to have that answered? Versus expecting her at a next meeting or in a week or in a month to have an answer to that. So that was my point with that question, was yes, we can ask questions. The department heads and discussion with Kim, their answers can be different depending upon what the question is and the timing of those answers.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with that. I think it's important to, for whatever it's worth, to keep in mind that the department heads, the questions of the department heads should be easily answered. Asking for reports that don't exist, I think should be avoided unless they're absolutely critical. And I agree that would require a conversation between the committee, Kim, and the department head.
Yeah,
but I'm a little leery in general about engaging the select board. One person's opinion. I think that the budget committee has to have some independence of the select board. I understand the select board has authority over the department heads, but I don't think the select board should be saying to the budget committee, you should not look into this or not look into that.
I'm not saying they should. I think
okay,
it's
okay.
so BB in this case would be the representative. She could chime in for the selectmen to say, I think that's a reasonable request. I think that's something with everything else that chief has to do, chief can provide that in X given time, or there's maybe more information that we have to give chief. Because the questions from what the emails that were sent were, and I'm not going to put chief on the spot, but we had no transparency to what questions were being asked and what the reasonable information that they should provide in a time frame. It was just, I'd like this request to be, here's my request, without any other discussion, and no one knew what those requests were. So my only concern to department heads was that if we had 6 different members sending chief 4 different requests, chief now has 24 requests, and does chief have to deliver 24 requests, answers? So I just want some transparency on the requests, and I think it's not unreasonable to ask everybody to just CC each other or CC the budget committee when we have questions.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to make sure we completed that conversation.
Great. Any other thoughts or questions around that? Okay. And then last, implied list of ethics.
In general, I've been impressed this year of our internal conduct. We had a couple moments which elicited a outburst from me. I would like us to remain a very honorable group of people, and I am concerned when outside of this operation people come up to me and said, well, I was reading about you or such and such on Facebook. I don't do Facebook, but I just think if anybody has a problem with one of us in here, that discussing it with them in person is a nice way to go, and we don't need to diminish the honor of the organization by taking it elsewhere. Thank you.
Chris, may I please?
Yeah.
I thought this might come up, and I have utilized on numerous occasions social media, and I have never directly disparaged anyone. In fact, I did print out. So I have copies for everyone, if you'd like to see any of the posts that I brought to our, I brought to our town people, utilizing the most efficient and cost-effective means available to us at this time. So I'll just be happy to distribute this. But no, I never once disparaged anyone directly. I shared my opinion. I said it was respectfully my opinion. I think I used the words most sincerely and respectfully numerous times. The internet is not the devil's tool. It is this side of history. This is how we share information and social media. It was important to me to share some of these things. So I understand where you're coming from, Dr. Wilson, but also I am going to defend myself here. And when I read this agenda item, I went, oh, I know where this is coming from. So I went ahead and prepared, and I'll just pass these down, or if, maybe somebody else can do that for me so it's not quite as horrendously awkward, I would appreciate that. And that's that, because I don't think anybody's actually even gone on there and read them, to which I did not, again, attack anyone directly. I cannot control the comments. But that is freedom of speech. You guys are welcome to them also.
Any questions or comments? Here. Oh my God, wait. All right. Any other business?
I don't have a microphone.
Or Melissa, go ahead.
I do. Lindsay, I feel like Facebook and social media isn't quite the right place because you can either friend somebody or not friend somebody to see your comments. And so it's not...
I did them on residents' pages.
It's not real, like, transparent public information.
Again, neither is the inner town, which is now only digitally dispersed, and/or the shopper, which I can't tell you the last time I read the shopper back to back. You're on the wrong side of history here. It's a
So I
means
disagree
of
with you
information.
respectfully.
No, but I didn't share them on a personal page. I reached out to a town page that is run by a moderator and asked her permission. And she said yes. And then I said, I completely understand if you'd like to delete these. However, this is, again, there are means of communication. I utilize the one that is the most actually transparent and efficient and economic in these times.
I'll just go back to John.
I'll retract then, because I thought you were talking social media like Facebook and Twitter and...
That is Facebook. It's a Town of New London page on Facebook.
It's not the town's.
Right,
town.
I'm saying
It's
Okay. I apologize.
So I think we'll just go back to John's original. To your point, John, we've had some moments, but I think for the most part, we've all been respectful, and just that's important to continue as this progresses. There will always be difficult conversations. There'll always be difference of opinions, sometimes very strong, sometimes light, but I think when we have those disagreements, it's being respectful of each other and our opinions, and being professional. So I appreciate the addition to the agenda and the reminder. Bill.
So on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I want to thank you, Melissa, I want to Hannah and Colin for your 3 years of service. Listening to you tonight, Melissa in particular, has been very helpful, and I hope the Selectmen will work with the new Budget Committee to try to address some of these issues. Also, Charlie is the new guy. Some of the things you've said too, but you're not leaving, so not time to thank you quite yet. But Melissa and Colin and Hannah by proxy, thank you for your 3 years of service.
And I welcome any we have elections coming up. We've had a couple folks who are running. We have one in the audience right now. But when we have our new committee, we'll pull together a meeting and discuss what the year could look like, and so have similar discussions. But I'd also welcome any, in the short term, I like the ideas of, having educational sessions, potentially some other subcommittees if we so choose to do so. So I think that's been some good discussion and some good learnings along the way. So I think we'll take a look at that once the new committee's together. And Bill, I don't know who the select member will be next year. If it will be the new, dependent upon the election. We'll see. Working with that select member on a process. Yeah, here, do you want to?
Yeah, this is my second year in the Budget Committee. Of course, having another hat as Emergency Management Director, I've gone to work with the department heads, and I will tell you, like I said, I had 47 years of government service. I have never worked with such a dedicated group of people as the department heads in this town. We have the best fire department that I've seen. We have the best police department that I've seen. And, public works, planning, recreation, our town clerk is second to none. And I think while we're looking at numbers and we're looking at ideas and challenges, we often forget that our work is basically people. We are here to provide a service, and the service is so the people who provide those services can actually provide them to the people who need those services and also who demand those services. And so I would like to, thank the folks that have been so absolutely superb in carrying in carrying the ball and making sure that this done work, and that also goes for the Board of Selectmen and our town administrator and of course, you know, seldom raising her voice is Lynn Lewis, who's just an amazing, if there's number crunching, she does it, you know, while we're here discussing stuff, so thank you.
Well said, Lou. Thank you. And thank you again to, I know we've thanked before, but Melissa, Colin, Hannah, for your commitment the last 3 years. All right. Any other business or any motions to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Any seconds? Second. All those in favor? Aye. All right. All right.